Disasters and emergencies do occur unexpectedly, leading to losses that could be material or indeed lives. In view of these inevitabilities, the world has to learn how to cope with them. While some emergencies such as earthquakes, tornadoes and tsunamis are natural, there are also man-made disasters. Like all countries of the world, Nigeria has had her share of disasters and emergencies, but management and coordination of these have always been put to question. While the country has put in place mechanisms to tackle such occurrences, the agencies and stakeholders seem not to get it right whenever their services are required. Responses to these natural and man-made phenomena are sometimes also disastrous, and many feel the people who are often affected are also not helping matters, as their actions and inactions during such emergencies contribute to the situation. Nigeria Today will take a look at Nigeria's responses to emergencies by identifying the problems that militate against effective and efficient management when the chips are down. Welcome to the program. I am Dennis Adigunloye. The program is Nigeria Today, and with me in the studio to take a critical look at the topic is Badanga Ahmed, National Coordinator, Civil Society Coalition on Disaster Risk Reduction. You're very welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got your name a little mixed up there. And also joining us in the studio is Mr. Abbas Idris, Director General of the FCT Emergency Management Agency. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's come to you first, sir. This seems to be a perennial issue that comes up every time in this country. What is the situation in terms of managing disasters in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Presenter. I think it's very apt that we're having this program at this time, especially looking at the issue of flood that is currently ravaging several states are currently affected. So it's a germane topic and as an issue that we should look at not only in terms of flood, like I have said, but disaster in general. If you want to look at the disaster architecture of this country, vis-a-vis where we are in comparison with other developed nations, we would say to a large extent that we have done quite a lot, but we still need to do very much more than where we are. Because the 2012 flood, for instance, we almost said that we have never had such a magnitude of disaster in terms of flood in the past, but it suddenly came, and since 2012 to date, we need to now begin to ask ourselves, what have we learned, where are we, what have we done? If you now want to extray these things vis-a-vis our present state, we really say that there's a lot to be done, particularly when you talk of some basic 5 issues you want to look at in terms of disaster management. One, you need to have what we call a very functional disaster institution. You know, that is looking at area of preparedness, you're looking at preventive measures, you're looking at response, you're looking at mitigation, and even recovery. All these 5 cardinal areas, where are we if we want to look at it so far? You know, in terms of, because, you know, sometimes when people talk about response, you can't just talk about response without looking at what precedes the response to, you know, you have to get prepared, you have to have the preventive measures, you have to have the mitigative measures before you start talking about, you know, the response, and you now talk about recovery. So these are cardinal issues that we need to look as a country, and where are we as institutions that are, you know, that are saddled with responsibility of disaster management.
All right, let me bring you in, Mr. Abbas. One of the major problems in terms of emergency responses is poor coordination among the relevant response agencies to disasters, lack of proper equipment, and this has hampered operations. Just give us your take on why there's not a proper synergy between relevant agencies in terms of disaster response units.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, when it comes to coordination, I think that was even before.
with the institutions in place and the structure we have and also the framework of disaster response, I think it's very adequate. It has spelled out who at the scene of incidents and who is to lead each category of a disaster. So where you find out that there is any lacuna is probably the lead, who is supposed to lead, could not be able to take proper stage. Otherwise, everything has been categorized. When it comes to disaster management in a state, the first responders are the state emergency management agencies, not NEMA. And within the stakeholders, there is what we call the emergency response plan that has been prepared by all the stakeholders. And each agency has its own responsibility. And we have a lead per any emergency or any disaster. For instance, to cite an example, if there is a flood, the lead agency in that flood disaster is the fire service. And so there is no way a Federal Road Safety Corps Marshal or Corps will go and now start taking lead in that aspect. Yeah. Likewise, bomb blast, the fire has to go, the fireman has to go, extinguish the fire before the rescue commences. So once there is a responsible state emergency management agency and they know the leadership, they will be able to coordinate, take charge and organize the scene of any incidents, and from there will be a coordinated response.
Okay, do you think there needs to be put in place a definitive system that will,
the system has been there.
It's been there. It's just not being followed.
It's been there, and that is why I told you that it is the responsibility of this state emergency management agency to really organize the response and coordination, because they are supposed to go there first and then call the responsible emergency management, the stakeholders, to be there so that they can each will now have. And that is another thing, is that where you find out there is no proper coordination also, maybe those stakeholders have not been meeting. If they are meeting, they should be having review meeting most often, so that they will be able to organize themselves. That is the preparedness he's talking about, part of those things. Not apart from the equipment. You may have the equipment, then you will have different operators of the equipment. And at the end of the day, the equipment will not be activated. So when you are in a meeting, you have to meet and then discuss about impending. If you have any early warning, then you now prepare yourself. Meet and then organize yourself. Sometimes even carry out simulation exercise so that you'll be able to identify the loopholes and then correct them. And when you come back after an incident, there is need for you to have a briefing of all the stakeholders, then identify the loopholes and then block it for a future occurrence.
I understand the military did, last week, did a simulation exercise to try and prepare for this. Okay, coming to you, Mr. Ahmed. Like I said in my background at the opening, some of these disasters that we see on an annual basis, especially with regards to flooding, often man-made. What sensitization exercises need to be undertaken to educate the masses themselves, because a lot of what we see in terms of flooding is as a result of human activity. What do you say to that?
Yeah, sensitization is key, you know, because even if you look at the global body, United Nations, UNICEF, the focus has not been in terms of the focus been on what we call disaster risk reduction. Yeah. And that means they are looking at the preventive aspect of it, and mitigation in particular. So awareness is key. But to add that to what he has said, what we seems to like to a large extent is that the policies are there. There are a lot of contingency plan, roadmap, stakeholder meeting, a lot, but the problem is at the implementation level. Implementing it becomes difficult, and part of it is also awareness. Right. This awareness which you have talked about, because if you look at if you are talking about prevention, we are talking about preparedness. Yeah. Part of it is also being able to educate people, create that awareness for them to know what to do at what level. Not only the citizens, even the actors, the stakeholders, because most of this disaster happens at the local level, and we as a coalition, we have members across the country, and we have also been engaging in different areas of educating the public, the communities at the local level, first aid, on what to do when there are disasters, the early warning system, no early warning system, all these basic things are what we need to. But it's not. But unfortunately, some of these things, it's not. We need to do it in a more sustainable way. It's not sustained. Yeah. We most often adopt what we call a fire brigade approach. You understand? So it is when the situation comes that we run to do it. But in other climb, you have this sustainable program on where you educate the public on what to do. The media, the traditional rulers, the critical stakeholders all come together to do this thing. So, and I think, like I've said from the beginning, we've been doing a lot, but we need to do more. We need to put more impetus in trying to see that we overtake. Because if you look at disaster in the other country, if you compare the level of flood we're having to what we have even in some of the developed countries now, you discover that this is just minute.
This is a minor thing.
This is minute.
There's a lot.
So I wonder if and sometimes they do contain it. When in terms of evacuation, they have serious mechanism for early warning system. They evacuate you to a higher ground and all that. But if such magnitude of disaster happens here, I wonder what would happen.
Well,
so we get there.
We hope that day will never come anyway. Mr. Idris, just in terms of casualty figures, a lot of times it is reported from one medium and another medium. Casualty figures are different. What needs to be done to synergize and to get accurate casualty figures when presenting those kind of facts to the public?
Yes, please let me just touch on the issue of sensitization, because it is a key to our operations. Yeah. And I know we have invested more on that. From 2012 flood disaster, we have keyed in a program that we reach out to the public through the community town halls meetings in all the communities of the FCT, using different kinds of language they understand, and they strengthening our vanguards and volunteers in those localities. And we go there, we show them cinemas, we show them videotapes of the previous flood within the territory. We are not bringing anything from either Niger, Nasarawa or Kaduna within the territory. And we show them the number of casualties that this flood has consumed, so that they can be careful. And then there we now tell them that, what caused the floods are the following, so that they should guide against. This is important because of what he said, the disaster risk reduction. We don't capitalize on relief materials. Relief material to our agency is the last resort. Thank you. Then going to the next question of casualty. I think it's associated with lack of proper coordination. If I can recall, the bomb blast, the bus station bomb blast at Nyanya, it was well coordinated. We had to, after moving all the casualties to the hospitals, we had to group ourselves. And I led that team to all the various hospitals that we took those affected by this disaster, and we counted the number of casualties and agreed on the figures before we addressed the press. And if you have that kind of coordination, there wouldn't be conflicting figures. The problem is that if there are so many cooks in the kitchen, everybody will bring his food for testing at that material time, because everybody was eager to address the press. But once we coordinated ourselves and say, this is the only mouthpiece, then nobody will go and address the press with different figures.
And this, getting these figures right, will also aid in terms of the required levels of relief materials to...
that is one. And another thing also, it will also be allow you to have adequate planning of manpower and so on and so forth with the technology that is in place, so that you can be able to man future disasters.
All right, we'll continue the discussion, but for now you're watching Nigeria Today, and our focus has been on response to emergencies in Nigeria. We'll take a break from the studio and head to the streets to sample divergent views on responses to emergencies in Nigeria. The program continues shortly.
From the meteorologists, we heard that there will be a little bit this is water flow in the country. So we are supposed to be conscious of what we are doing, at least not to be blocking our waterways, the channel and the waters. We should take care of it properly.
There is always an allocation for ecological something. I don't know, in the national budgets they actually give every year, but we don't know where this budget goes to, this money goes to, you understand? So it's always now left to the public or to the people to ask the government, okay, fine, this money is allocated to, or for this particular thing, should actually be released for the repairs of things that are actually happening.
Citizens are also to be blamed, not just the government. If the government cares so much about the people, they will construct drainage system for the water to pass through it and not affect the citizen. And the citizen too, in turn, they are not supposed to build on the drainage system. They're not supposed to build on the waterway. They're supposed to build in a way that if there is erosion on that part, they leave that part completely. And if they find out that that part is affected already, they don't need to stay there until the flood meets them.
I think at the government level, those responsible for environmental care and all the parastatals involved should be responsible. They should be active.
These people have given us a notice about, I think that was around July, that they will open the dam. But now the dam has been opening, they will now be looking for a way to relieve people, whereas an ESOP has been given prior to this time. But they are not proactive. That is the only thing I said about this country. We prefer wasting resources in corrective measures instead of being proactive in doing things that will curtail the effects.
A cross-section of views from members of the public there on our topic. Coming to you, Mr. Ahmed, you heard some of the comments made by some members of the public there, talking about practices of people, throwing things in drainages and clogging up the waterways. We touched on human activity previously, but just talk to us a bit more about environmental enforcement. Some time ago, there used to be a specific day geared for environmental sanitation. Do you think that that enforcement needs to be, strengthened?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's important that we strengthen our capacity in terms of, like we have said, in particularly in terms of, because it also boils back to awareness that we're talking about. Yeah. Some states still observe it. Like in I'm from Kogi. Kogi states still observe this monthly sanitation. Maybe some further few states, and. It's a good, if we can sustain it, to me, it's a very good idea, and the whole scenario of enforcement in terms of environmental enforcement, the regulations are there, but to what extent are we really enforcing them? That's the issue. Secondly, do we have the capacity to really enforce those regulations? In terms of personnel, in terms of coordination, like he has said, house coordination. Yeah. So these are some of the things that were lacking. If you look at the OSHA statistics about disaster globally, it said about 4.4 billion Nigerians were affected globally in the last 20 years statistics, disaster, and about 2.1. UNHCR said that we underestimate the cost of what we have lost in terms of disaster. He also said that about $2.5 trillion were lost to fire, to various disasters globally, and Nigeria also has its own fair share of it. So come to it, you see, we have the Ministry of Environment. Those days we used to have inspectors who goes to house, who they call, I think they call them Wale also then. So, these are structures that are on the basis that helps to keep people in check in terms of enforcement. So we have the building code. People are building naturally. I was reading about this LPG, this gas, if you send gas explosion in Nasarawa and some other states, you discover that there are no mechanism to really, some of these organizations or agencies that are supposed to really ensure that these regulations are put in place are not really sometimes up and doing, So, and this has caused a lot of, gaps that have allowed so many things to happen, even in terms of building code. We have building codes. People should not build on on a waterway.
Yeah, I was gonna
so
come
people
to
build
this.
on waterway.
Yeah.
So and these are serious. The LPGs we are using that are causing this is these are because there's no proper regulations and proper enforcement. People just we have a proliferation of people who sell LPGs around, and this also causes a lot of problem. So the standard organization is there, and several other enforcement agencies that are supposed to critically monitor and ensure that this. But unfortunately, there's still gaps somewhere, and I believe over time, as we keep talking, we'll begin to see improve on some of this.
Okay, Mr. Idris, obviously there are natural disasters that are inevitable that you cannot have any human control over. Yeah. And some from experts that I've spoken to, they talk about, like Mr. Ahmed said, that building on waterways is a significant contributor to this issue of flooding. So how do we now, put a check on this practice, especially in this country, in terms of building on waterways?
Yeah, this it will take us back to our earlier discussion, the topic that is the enlightenment, public enlightenment and education. We really need to be serious about it. We need to educate the public. The public needs to know that what they are doing endangers their lives, especially the issue of building on the floodplain areas. Yeah. I always say, I said it in this studio, that the cheapest land in Abuja and elsewhere is a floodplain lands. The cheapest land is the area where water cannot, where you cannot live peacefully there. So therefore, people should avoid that kind of lands. And also, if you go to the satellite towns, you will see that when it is about raining, that is the time they will start coming out with their waste to dump it in the drainages. Yeah. So they're expecting the water to take it away. And we have to stop that attitude, honestly, for us to, because everybody, apart from government, I must commend the president, President Ibrahim Muhammadu Buhari, who has proactively acted on this impending flood now, who called NEMA to declare a state of emergency on those states that are going to be affected, and also injected money to the tune of 3 billion to be able to manage that issue. So we need to also join hands with the government to ensure that we avert those disasters from happening. The natural disaster, of course, we cannot be able to stop it, but we can be able to mitigate through that. And especially the issue of building on the floodplain and then waterways. We need to check that all the urban development offices must check this kind of reckless buildings. These are avoidable.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Ahmed, tell us what systems are currently in the pipeline or actually in place to ensure a proper patient tracking system with regards to victims and those who caught up in these natural disasters.
Well, like you said, there are a lot of contingency plans, that have been developed. Even if we go to NEMA, there's the GIS. So these are tracking mechanisms, which they are interfacing with NICOMSAT and the Space Research Center. So these are structured. There are structures that are actually put in place, which signals. Then I know. There's within the NEMA, there's the search and rescue department, and there's this GIS that was linked to if there's a air crash, there's you instantly they can track it, and so there are structures in place, put in place, which is part of what the stakeholders have built over time in the contingency plan to be able to track some of these incidences that have happened. Specific to our coalition, for instance, like I said, we have members across the country. And of recent, because of the 2012 flooding that we had, we have also been looking at areas in which we can also interface and intervene, and we also come up with different programs. Recently, we sent to the Vice President, who is the head of governing board of NEMA, itemizing some of the things we feel should be done in terms of being proactive, so which he has also sent to NEMA for us to look at. You know, part of it is also, we're also looking at it, like you have said, how do we track these victims? You know, some of these victims that are being affected, for instance, in the flood area, when they live in most of them are settled over the years in this. In fact, some of them are fishermen, farmers, and the ancestral homes are already, you can't just tell them to live there.
They're set in their ways.
Of course, we now come up with our own, recommendations on what we should do, so that you have early warning, so we can track what we are even talking about auditing, because we're trying to find out to what extent is NEMA having the profile of most of the highly disaster risk areas. We are calling for an audit, a general audit of most of these disaster prone areas, so that, because before you start tracking, we should be on ground, to understand all these things. So these are some of the things. So we have a lot of programming together, working together with NEMA to see that we...
All right, okay. Just briefly, so in 30 seconds, just tell us what can be done in terms of psychosocial counseling and post-traumatic, treatment of those who are victims.
We do that. That is the post-disaster activities. When there is a disaster, those affected by the disaster, we go out. We have a unit of psychosocial experts who come to really give psychosocial therapies to those victims, so that we calm them down and then really talk to them. Even the recent the earth tremor, we had to do that because some people were really shocked and devastated. So that is necessary in post-disaster management.
All right. Well, we certainly hope that your efforts this year, 2018, to minimizing and mitigating the causes of disasters in this country. We're not going to be back here next year talking about the same thing. So I'd like to appreciate you for coming.
Thank you.
We want to appreciate Badanga Ahmed, I hope I got that right this time, National Coordinator, Civil Society Coalition on Disaster Risk Reduction. Thanks for joining us. And also Mr. Abbas Idris, the Director General, FCT Emergency Management Agency. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you for
And to you out there, we want to thank you for staying tuned. Join us tomorrow for more insightful discussions on the program. Remember, Nigeria Today is on weekdays, same time. You can also watch any episode on www.youtube.com/NTA News 24 Hub. My name is Dennis Adegonoye. Enjoy the rest of your evening.